Hello,
Hey,
Dr.
how's it going?
I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you for being here. Before
Thank
we,
you for inviting me and putting this together. It's such a wonderful thing and so many incredible people and topics. And, resilience is like a universe of universes, right? Of just how one can think about it. It's not, when you think of the word, you think of like, okay, enduring or, but it's so much bigger than that. I mean, it really, you can frame it in a way that it's everything. And that's what I love about it.
that and we'll dive into that. Before I officially introduce you, I want you to just go a little higher and show us what is on your shirt. Tell us.
Oh yeah. Well, it's this little project that I have going. I have only told a few people about it, but it's just this idea that how we tend to wear these labels on our clothing, but we know very little about the companies that those labels are referring to, their history, whether they support child labor, or what are the challenges that they've faced. What are their sort of experiences with resilience, and which side of the coin have they sort of focused on in terms of dealing with the challenges. And to me, it's what I'm trying to do is be more intentional in my life, in every way I possibly can. And so this is a project where I'm sort of thinking like, well, imagine, as we kind of venture away from nature in this society. Imagine if everybody wore something that had nature on our clothing. So instead of having labels, we actually had pictures of animals, or other aspects of nature that would just make us think, even in subconsciously, about nature. And maybe that would help tip the scales a little bit to help us get reacquainted with nature and each other, and the oneness that really everything is. And so this is the little project that I have going, and I've ironed on. Instead of, I was thinking, oh, maybe I could get like new clothing, but then I thought, no, the best thing would just get iron on. So I found these adorable, and I have, I don't know if you can see it, but on my pants as well, I have another. There we go.
Oh, there's one of those at our house. I was wondering what
Yeah,
that is.
yeah, yeah. There, I
That
dropped some off. Yeah, yeah. Case
okay.
under bridge.
Okay, I need some of those. So I love that. And what I love is the creativity of it, the intentionality of it, and just and running an experiment. And so the reason I've had you on the show is I've had the pleasure of getting to know you here in Boston. You are a very inspiring human. You have a deep science background as an inventor, innovator, MIT researcher. My understanding is you have several patents, you've had several companies. You are a very prolific creator and inventor, and you come from a deep science background. And yet, the theme of today is around connecting to your true nature, which often comes from the more spiritual perspective, let's say. And so, I want to start with you sharing what you mean by true nature, and then we can walk our way into how the science background and the engineering and the research and the work in being an innovator has actually informed how you live now in this process of becoming more intentional. And so we'll build into that, but maybe just start by what does it mean connecting to your true nature?
Yeah, absolutely. And even before I go there, I think resilience is just something that I've been submersed within from the time I was very young, because I struggled a lot with undiagnosed ADHD and learning differences, and really felt like an alien, felt like I didn't belong, felt like everyone else got it and I didn't get it. And so through the support of my parents, my mom in particular, and a small handful of teachers, most actually weren't that supportive. And, a lot, was getting these labels like lazy and lost cause, and they would ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I'd say, oh, I want to be a doctor. And they say, well, you better set your sights lower because you just don't have what it takes. And so I feel like I encountered a lot of challenges and struggle in my own way when I was younger, and through the support of the people I mentioned, I was able to, and it was really hard, but I feel like I was able to persist and not just endure, but actually tap into what I really think is our evolutionary inheritance. Like, everybody has this incredible ability to adapt and to to grow and evolve and to integrate the experiences that we are having, so that as we progress in life, we can actually have more deeper experiences. And as we face new challenges, well, we do have this emotional side of us, which is really, deep within our amygdala and some other, brain regions that sort of gets us into this fight or flight state. We are able to sort of bring it back to the prefrontal cortex where we can think about thinking, and then we can use our hippocampus for integration, so that as we all have this incredible biology accessible to us all the time. And I think as we have these, one of the challenges I think is that as we face new challenges and we struggle, the emotional pendulum just swings way out, and we feel terrible and in this sort of very negative space, and it's hard to really do anything. And what I've learned in my life is, by sort of tapping into my own biology, that if I just wait, a few days or a week or, whatever it is, that if I get a couple good nights sleep, have some nice conversations, that emotional pendulum starts to work its way back. And that's almost like one of these after the rain moments, where then I can actually think more deeply about what just happened. And I think we as humans, I think that we maybe we don't realize how powerful just thinking about something can be, and what that actually unfolds in our minds, and how that makes us open to hearing things in conversations or seeing things. And that by tapping into and just sort of letting this process unfold, and we need to be, I think, active, and become more active as the emotions sort of subside, then we can really start to thrive. And we can start to, we're never going to get to a situation where we're not going to have these emotional pendulum swings, but what we can do is we can recognize when they're happening. And I think we can exist within that moment, but realize that there will be another moment that will soon come, where we can actually where that learning process we can engage, and that will program into our minds, with neuroplasticity and rewiring, and we can really embrace resilience.
Mm. Well, I love your definition of resilience, because to me as well, it's not just about bouncing back. Very basic definition of resilience is this idea that we bounce back, that we can get through challenges. To me, it's about growth and transformation, that life has many challenges, many opportunities for growth, some bigger than others. And if we can actually continuously grow through them and become better, and ideally learn from our past and learn from our missteps and rebuild better. So it's not just about bouncing back, but it's actually about becoming new. And most of us know, if we've been through a major crisis, that there is no really going back. It's just a matter of, do you actually let it inform you to become an even better, more true version of yourself? Do we build back a city actually more resilient? Do we learn about building materials? We're talking about on a physical level, but do we
Yeah.
actually learn about ourselves? And that's what's so incredible about humans. And we are naturally resilient. And so there's this biology of resilience. But what have you found, some things that you think about? You spoke about just being aware of that kind of pendulum, letting the emotional be okay, because you know that there's going to be a wave where you have more clarity and access to higher decision making after, and you can think about your thinking. And that's just kind of naturally happening. But what are some of the things that you think about consciously that has had you become more resilient and just more capacity? I also just think about resilience as capacity as a leader, our
Mm.
capacity to lead, to innovate, to steward. You're a father, you're a husband, you're a business owner, you're a collaborator, you have a big life. So a lot of capacity. To me, that is resilience, the ability to be with potentially many stressors and many moving parts, and yet be with it all with integrity. And so what's some things that you do think about to build your capacity and your resilience?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think sort of within what you just said is also this sense that resilience is not just about survival. Because I think if it was, we the process would be very different. The like how we actually, even just this sense of when we encounter a challenge and we go to this sort of negative place, but then we get ourselves out of it, and then we sort of look back and we see that actually helped us in some way to not just survive, but to actually expand our minds, to be able to see things from fresh angles, to do things that we couldn't do before, to process things in unique ways. And that really lights up our brains and makes us feel great. And I think it also sort of increases the risk that we are willing to take on in the next pursuits that we engage. And so to me, like, one of the critical aspects of resilience is that that once you sort of embrace it and you realize that that even if it takes you into these negative places and you do struggle, that your brain is rewiring in a positive way, that there are things that you can that you can reflect back on and see that they actually helped you in your path moving forward. And I think that that helps us to also deepen our everyday experiences. That helps us to embrace more richness in life. And I think that we're kind of at a stage right now in society where our true sort of capacity for resilience is being challenged by the powers to be, the orchestrators of society, the digital realm. And I think that that is actually is sort of like even more reason why we need to have a strategy, a personal strategy for resilience. And sort of getting to your question, I think that the more we can think about resilience and approach it in an intentional way, it will then transcend to everything that we do. So through our work, through our organizations, how we lead, it will impact the people around us, whether it's at work or at home, or our friends, who kind of will see, like, people need to have examples. And if you're somebody who is going to face something head on and, maybe stumble and you feel like you're falling sort of backwards, but if you embrace this process of resilience, you can actually use it as a way to fall more forward than backwards, kind of when you assess the situation more over time. And that gives an example to other people that, can be very inspiring to take more risk, to embrace challenges, to realize that, we tend to have these high expectations. Even like, if you look at, for example, look at like children, they feel like the first time they do something, they're going to be great at it, right? And I feel like adults as well, right? The first time you're like, oh yeah, I've never snowboarded before, but yeah, it looks pretty straightforward. And then you get up and you just start falling. But then, you have friends around you and, they sort of like encourage you, and you fall like over and over and over again, but eventually you start to get it. And I think actually just one example I think is just so that I think a lot of people can relate to is even just look at like children who are starting to crawl, who are starting to walk. They are often falling all over the place. They're getting a little bit injured, but they don't stop. They never stop, right? They always persist. They always keep trying. They always get back up at some point. They might fall down and cry, and it seems like a very emotional kind of big right in the struggle. But you'll see the next day or the next day after that, they're trying at it again, and they're trying new things. And if you observe, they're learning from the experience. And to me, that's data that shows us that this is wired into us. And it's really, the question is, are you willing to tap into that process or not? Because if it's a conscious decision, I think as we get older, whether we want to activate that process, and we it's there waiting for us to be intentional with it.
Okay, well, let's speak about that process, because you're speaking about risk and the willingness to take risks. And to be successful, we have to take risks, smart risks, ideally. But learning to walk feels like a big risk as a child. Learning to snowboard is an athletic risk that we know comes with some potential danger, but also investing in Bitcoin or starting a new company or putting a show out or putting, all of these things feel risky, and in some regards are. You are someone that's invented and innovated, which that's taking risk all along the way. But you're saying that we can kind of consciously and intentionally rewire and work with our brain to be able to take more risks, to try new things, to not give up, and to keep going. What are some of the things we can do intentionally to work with ourselves and rewire the way that we think, and maybe diminish some of the fear that we have?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one of the ways is what I like to refer to as flip the switch, which is essentially looking for different mindsets. So the lens that we're looking at various situations. And what I've found in my life is that often I'm looking at things through a very narrow lens. It just seems to just constantly gravitating towards that. And so, but by having sort of a kind of knowing that and really wanting to see things from different angles, because I've gotten to know that that actually can open things up in incredible ways. I've been able to flip the switch and really be able to encounter failure in a way where it doesn't immobilize me. I mean, it does, maybe for a day or two, whatever it is, a short period of time, but then I can. So for example, when I started my laboratory, hey, I needed to secure a certain number of grants in order to have funding to support my lab and my salary and, all these things. And I got a lot of advice from other people that they just said, well, whatever you did previously in your research training, just do the same thing, but add something small to it. And, because then you could show reviewers that they give them confidence that you can do whatever you're sort of planning to do. But that didn't sit well with me because I really wanted to do things I'd never done before. I wanted to, expand and go beyond. And so I had actually encountered a lot of struggle. In fact, my first almost 100 grants that I submitted in the first 2.5 years, I was very aggressive in my grant writing and submitting process. Like 95, 96 were rejected. So much so to the point where my wife, at one point, I come home and she said, "Are you sure this is the right career for you?" Now, what happened was the flip the switch moment for me actually occurred when, I get these grant rejections. It feel like I was being punched in the face, like it really the visceral negativity of like, because I felt like I was putting my best work out there and then I would just get these rejections. And if I looked at a lot of the grant reviews would come back, and I would look at it and be very angry early on, like, how could they think that? They missed this point. They totally didn't get it. But what I realized over time through sort of focusing on the process and just sort of trying to see things from different angles, trying to just sit with it and just think about it, like what just happened, and when that emotional pendulum, pardon me, started to kind of come back, it's like I started to realize, I went back to the review comments and I was, wait a moment, they're trying to school me and how to write a better grant. Like there's actually something really positive here. And when I was able to recognize that and then focus on it, I started to integrate what they were telling me into my mind. And so when I wrote future grants, I started to get them. Like that sort of like, there was a this ability to flip my mindset because the experience was so painful, but yet I sort of was able to find a way to let those pains subside, and then I could just look at it from a different way and be like, wait a moment, these reviewers are not trying to attack me, they're trying to help me. And when I flipped that switch, I was then able to secure grants. And at the 2.5-year mark, I only have funding for 3 years, so I was about to sort of lose my position. And at the 2.5-year mark, I got 3 major grants came in. My lab tripled in size, and I was able to grow from that. So to me, like the big part of it is just being able to sort of recognize that often our lack of resilience comes from seeing things through a narrow lens. And I think that, just by having conversations with other people and getting to know their processes, we can start to unravel possibilities that we're not currently thinking about. And when we do that, we're truly embracing resilience, in a very deep way.
So looking back at that time, and maybe you've had other instances since where, your wife said, are you sure this is the right career path for you? I'm curious how you think about when to not give up, because in that instance you just kept going for it, you didn't give up, and eventually started learning from the rejections. But you didn't take the rejections as, oh, this is not the right path. And it can be hard to discern the feedback, right? Is feedback from life showing me I'm going in the wrong direction, or is the feedback saying just don't give up, just keep getting better, just don't give up. And I'm curious how you think about that. And there's been many opportunities since that where I'm sure there's been challenges and doors that shut. How do you discern, okay, I'm meant to just keep knocking on other doors here, or this door shut because I'm actually meant to go in this other direction?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think so. To me, had I given up there, let's say, and I don't even know really if it would have been called giving up, but like had I said, okay, this is enough, right? I got to go do something else. I think to me the key, kind of looking back, is that that wiring for resilience stays with you. You know what I mean? Like it's not like you're shutting that off. It's always there. You can always tap into it. And so I think had I done that, I think there would have been challenges associated with sort of leaving, but I think that there's all these opportunities and possibilities to then re-engage it in other things. So I'd like to think that, there's rarely in life are there like dead ends, where, I mean, I feel like maybe there's certain conditions or diseases or things where you're actually, your ability for neuroplasticity or engaging resilience can actually be compromised. But short of that, we all have it and it's just waiting for us. So in some ways, it's sort of our capacity for it it doesn't change based on leaving something and. So I just think important to sort of consider that. And then the other thing to me that is really an important point, at least how I've experienced resilience, is like I think everybody needs one thing in their life where they have self-efficacy, agency, where they're doing something and they're improving or getting better or furthering or evolving because of their own intentionality. And like I'll give you an example. When I was younger, things weren't going very well. I was a C&D student, bless you, I was just falling through the cracks. And my mom, there were these speech competitions. My mom actually wrote the speeches for me, and then she started to coach me to memorize them. And I was horrible at memorizing things, but she kind of said, "Okay, let's see if you can memorize one word." And then I did it, and she said, "Well, if you can do one word, you can do two." And then I did two, and she said, "If you can do two, you can do a sentence. And if you can do a sentence, you can do a paragraph. And then if you do a paragraph, you can do a page." And so I was able to then, with that support, I was able to memorize. And while I was sort of falling through the cracks and everything else, I started to become the kid to beat in the speech competitions. And I was always like the last person to be picked in sports. It was like me and this other kid for like basketball or soccer. Like I wasn't like socially connected with people. School wasn't going well, but I had that one thing, which was speech competitions, where I was putting in the effort and I was improving, and I was getting better at it and better at it. And to me, that's like a core aspect of all of sort of what we're sort of discussing here, is that if you have that one thing, and it could be anything, it could be like a hobby, it can be anything at all, you can bring like that sort of I think when you tap into that and recognize it, you're furthering that. And that's why I think, as we become adults, there's this sense of like, oh, you should leave your hobbies behind, like in the workforce, right? Like it's not encouraged as I think it should be in most places, but like we do need that one thing to gain confidence in, because then that allows us to become more persistent in other things. And to me, I feel like that's what allowed me to become persistent in grant writing and go through, we've had all kinds of manuscripts, papers be rejected. I mean, all the time. It happens all the time, even now. Like things don't get sort of easier. It's sort of like as I kind of look at it, it's not like things get easier. It's more that through sort of almost like tapping into resilience as a skill and believing in it and sort of trusting in that resilience process. It's like you can get back up faster. You're not sort of knocked down for as long a period of time, and you start trusting. Maybe this is sort of the spiritual side of resilience, is that you start to trust in just your capacity to face new challenges and be able to find a way, find a path. And to me, that's a lot of persistence actually comes from resilience.
You just have so many beautiful threads in that share, the message of persistence, to be persistent, to not give up, to not let our emotional response to rejection take us out, to see it for what it is, to learn from it, right? Rather than just simply having an emotional response, to shift the way we see rejection as an opportunity and something that's maybe happening for us to become better. There's a message of becoming great at something, becoming great at a craft so that you have confidence in yourself, because confidence is so important. And you said that in the like just any one thing that you can be great at. Of course, if there's something that you're great at that is of value in the marketplace, you'll also have a whole other level of confidence. But I had an experience when I started training triathlon. Now, I was not a great triathlete. I was not intending to be a top competitor, but just doing triathlon and training every morning with a team and having gone from not running at all from a shattered ankle to becoming a runner, not a great one, but still that actually improved my business because I saw myself doing something hard and rewiring the very way I thought about myself. And if you overcome limitation, I find in one area, it actually impacts how you think about everything. And you've spoken about neuroplasticity. You've mentioned neuroplasticity now a number of times. So let's talk about neuroplasticity because a lot of us are wired in such a way that if we get rejected, they're not we don't bounce back resiliently, or we don't take risks, or maybe they don't have the confidence, maybe they didn't have the mother that you had. There was a Harvard study that followed adults for 85 years and showed that in order to be successful, basically every single successful adult had at least one parent or mentor adult in their life that believed in them. Now, it's not to say you can't be successful without that, but you had that, you had that training. Your mom was helping you find an area that you could be great in, and you started to train that young. But independent of our upbringing, what we did or didn't have, what can we do as adults now to leverage the ability for neuroplasticity?
Yeah, I think well, one thing is by knowing a little bit about it and knowing about, the various brain regions that we have that are working for us. And to me, that can be extremely helpful and enlightening, and sort of, when you start to sort of have the puzzle put together in your mind, it can serve as like a basis from which um, to sort of, to have a strategy and be able to persist with that strategy. And so to me, it's sort of recognizing that, for example, that we do have this incredible part of our brain, the amygdala, and it is, it's like the first responder, right, to any sort of challenge that we face. And and it's there to help us. It's really there to, kind of going back tens of thousands of years when we were out, surviving outside, it served an incredible purpose to keep us alive. And today it's trying to do that, in our day-to-day situations. And so often the amygdala, if you're not someone who is sort of evolving resilience, one of the major reasons is because you're letting the amygdala do its thing, but you're sort of stepping back and not recognizing that there's this other part of our brains, which is just ginormous and incredibly powerful, which is the prefrontal cortex, which is where we do thinking about thinking, where we do emotional regulation, where so we can kind of, observe the amygdala and what's happening, and we can say, actually, wait a moment, thank you so much for, alerting us to this potential issue, but I've got it. I think I'm going to be okay. And I think that there's this incredible, just this amazing ability that we have to, when we really think about this, it's like, if you don't recognize that you have this incredible, tool, this capacity, it's hard to activate it in a really substantial way. And we start to realize, wait a moment, we all have these incredible regions of our brain that allow us to actually be intentional. And it's just a matter of engaging it and practicing engaging it. And then I think that the amygdala is like the first responder, and then we have like the prefrontal cortex is like, regulating the response. But then we have the hippocampus, which is doing the integration. And so that's what's going to allow us, as we approach another challenge in the future, it's going to remind us like, wait a moment, remember that time that, whatever happened, and you had this emotional pendulum swing and it was felt very negative and your amygdala was firing, going crazy, but then you were able to sort of bring it back and you were able to do something intentional about it. You were able to uncover a new insight or change your mindset or just think about it differently. And that allowed you to move forward. And then, we have the hippocampus is doing this integration. And to me, thinking about the three of them, that's what sort of constitutes neuroplasticity, right? Is that, and the amygdala is great because it's putting us in this highly emotionally charged state, which allows us to have these imprints in our minds that we can recall in the future. Right? The stronger the imprint, the easier it is to recall it and, remember it and then, kind of go back to it and be like, oh yeah, like, and so it's like helping us to learn, as we go. So all of these, and there's all sorts of other regions, but to me, these are the sort of three regions to recognize that we all have those and they're working for us. And when you recognize that, you, I think, can have more confidence and be able to take more leaps of faith in what you're doing, because we have this very powerful biology that we're activating very small percentage of it, but it's all there and it wants to work for us every moment of our lives.
So what is something that you do? Let's say you get, you wrote a book recently, you're now stepping out with more thought leadership. That's different than being in a lab. It's a whole kind of new type of identity. Maybe you've come up against edges, I'm not sure. But typically when we do something totally new, we often see some type of limiting thought or behavior or reaction. When you notice the emotional response to a thought that you have or a belief or something that happens in your family, I'm not sure where it shows up for you, but assuming you're not totally perfectly confident all the time,
No.
and
No.
you mentioned to be aware of the emotional response and just kind of see it and acknowledge it. And to me, that's a mindfulness practice. Beyond that, what is something that you do when you notice a pattern that you would like to shift or let's say soften its response or reactivity to?
Yeah, there's a process that I engage that's relevant to what I mentioned before called flip the switch, and it's actually this 4-step process. And so the first part of the process is noticing our inner desire for possibility, that there's something that that we're not doing or could be doing, or something that other people do that we're not doing. Like we could deepen an experience, we could approach things from a different angle, we could think about it differently, we could act differently, we could change something. We just recognize there's that possibility. And when we recognize that, the second step is to take stock of what's working and what's holding us back, because often we have a lot of things that are working for us. We might be, we can just think about various parts of our life where we're intentional. Like maybe we get in a certain number of steps every day, or maybe there's certain foods that we avoid because we know that they cause our stomachs to get upset, or, maybe we are in our conversations with certain people, we're really trying to listen. Maybe we're trying to lead with curiosity. Maybe, so we all have these things that are working for us, and we just need to tap into those things and remind ourselves. And then we want to take stock as well of the things that are holding us back, what's really standing in the way. And often it's not clear just by thinking about it, but by focusing our attention on it and just sitting with it for, multiple days. I mean, it could be weeks, and even having conversations about it with other people, can start to open that up. And then we want to consider the third step is then considering that there's other possibilities. There's other ways of thinking about this. So and we can do that through conversations. We can ask people like, oh, when you encounter this type of a challenge, what do you do? How do you process it? What are some of the practices that you engage? And often you find, if you talk to enough people, that there's all kinds of things to try. And then the fourth step is just taking an intentional step forward. So, what maybe there's something that you could do to then approach the situation just slightly differently, or maybe there's something that you could do to be able to just, even for a short period of time, be able to see things through a different lens, be able to, you know, so to me, that's like, there's these 4 steps that can really be helpful. And it really begins with like just noticing that you do have an inner desire for possibility, that there is, you know, something there. And when you engage these steps, I think just things tend to just open up.
The frame of engaging from possibility first, it opens up so many, because then you recognize that there's infinite ways to solve a problem. There's infinite ways to potentially get from point A to point B. And so just getting out of that very contracted, there's only one way. And if that one way doesn't seem like it's working, then you can just shut down the whole thing. And so it's
Yeah.
really powerful. And we've had a couple conversations in this study, in this storm event, about innovation and creativity. And it's been mentioned several times to bring people into the conversation to get fresh perspective, to get new perspective. And you just mentioned that as well. I'm curious for you as an inventor, and when you're building new businesses and projects, how do you think about the process of incubating quietly versus bringing other people into the conversation? Is there a point at which you go from that kind of quiet, or do you right away start having conversations? How do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think what my process tends to be to keep originally or early on, to keep things really small, right? And so to see, and then the idea is that we try certain things, and then when we encounter, for example, a challenge, or something that just seems like insurmountable, that's when we'll say, okay, who can we bring into this, who will think about it differently, who will bring some new expertise. Or so for example, let's say we created a tissue glue to seal holes inside a beating heart, and we hit wall after wall. And then at one point we were like, okay, what are examples in nature? So we started looking in nature and we found some examples, and then they helped us to move beyond. And then we hit another wall and we said, okay, after the emotion sort of subsided, because every wall actually feels very, it's like negative. But then we said, okay, who could we bring in who has like some chemistry expertise that we don't have? Or could, we find somebody and then we have a conversation with them and they say, well, have you tried this? And we're like, no. And then all of a sudden you move from a situation that seems like devastation and the end to this most exciting thing ever, because now, there's this confidence that, oh, this might work. This might change things. This might allow us to take another step forward. And so to me, it's sort of like, I like to sort of start really small and then build out, where each person that's coming in is bringing a different perspective, bringing new tools, bringing new insights. And then you're sort of like leveraging the multidisciplinary aspect of a team, like the diversity. You're using diversity as like a superpower.
We'll wrap up with one or two more questions. So first is that you've mentioned several times that emotional response that happens after you hit a wall or rejection, and so you're just normalizing the fact that there is an emotional response that is natural in the brain when we feel like something's not working, or a failure, or this thing that we really care about is there's a wall. And you've also said that it naturally, especially if you've built resilience, subsides. But when you have that moment and you feel the emotional response, what is something that you tell yourself? Do you let yourself really go into the emotional response? Like, how do you be in that? Because what I've seen is that either you can ride that back into creativity, override it, which could potentially cause problems, or people let the emotional response, um, you know, what's the word I'm looking for?
Control them, or yeah,
Yeah, stop
yeah.
them from continuing forward. And so how do you be with that emotional response? That's very natural.
Yeah. So what I've recognized is that whenever I encounter that, setback or failure, or, however you want to refer to it, that there's no way that I can pull myself out of the emotional state. Like, I've tried a lot and I still continue to. So it's sort of like this quick realization that this is not something that I can actually flip quickly. So then the alternative then becomes, okay, maybe I can think about this a little bit differently. And maybe it's also like, maybe what I need to do is just move to something else. I need to occupy my mind in a different way with a different thing, or and just sort of switch, because I need to come back to this later, so maybe that's going for a walk, or going to an exercise class, or could be meditation or breath work, or playing a video game, or whatever it is, right? Like watching some Netflix. I mean, all of these things kind of can work at different times. And I think that there's also sort of like this, actually, another thing I do is I start talking to myself. Like I try to, and this is sort of something new because I've been engaging in all these practices and stuff. I try to give myself like a pep talk, like, hey, this is okay. It's going to happen. This isn't going to last forever. That's a big one. I say that a lot. Like this experience, what you're feeling is not going to last. It's going to subside. And I just, I use my name, like, Jeff, like, it's, you got this. It's, and I speak out loud, like, and I don't just speak out loud, but I speak in like almost like a motivational speaker kind of tone. And I find that actually can be quite helpful. And yeah, that's one of the things that I do. But there's all these other practices that I also try to engage in. So when like, for example, before I eat, I'll just take a few deep breaths. I like to, whenever I can, like look out the window and sort of connect with whatever I'm eating, with everything else that exists, and I like to let my mind wander about that. When I go to bed at night, I like to envision that I'm this small creature standing on top of a creature in nature. Like, on, let's say, like a miniature version of yourself standing on the back of like a bumblebee, and sort of feeling like all the like the wind from the wings, and I cycle through the senses. What would I be experiencing? Like the texture on my feet. And so I'm doing all of these practices throughout the day. And I feel like that also helps me when I'm in these situations where I have this emotional pendulum swing and this visceral negativity, to be able to sort of recognize that that I am sort of engaging intentionally in other aspects of my life, and that it sort of allows me, I'm able to step back outside of the negativity from a failure or setback. Like I'm going back and forth, right? I'm sort of like, oh my God, but I'm like, step back for a moment or two. And to me, that through because I do these practices, I'm able to do that. Like I'm able to sort of jump back and just be like, see myself reacting, and then I'm back in the reactive self. So that also has been really helpful.
The key takeaway from this conversation for me is around living intentionally and practicing awareness. Because that everything that you shared, whether it's about innovating and taking risks, or it's about resilience, or it's about navigating setbacks, there's this theme for you around returning to intention and building more intentionality into your life, and especially in the small in-between moments. Because what I just heard you say is that by doing that, like having intentionality when you eat, having intentionality about how you wake up, that then in the moments when you get triggered or hit by something, you can actually practice more intention and consciousness in those moments. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And sort of this recognition that we are all at the switches, that we have this powerful biology that's just waiting for us to activate it. And it's always there. Nobody can take it away from us. And when you start to recognize it and recognize the various parts of the brain that can, are trying to help us, and just have this incredible potential to allow us to have more rich experiences in life, and deepen our connections with other people, and lead with curiosity, and, all these things. I think, to me, that's a big part of it, is just recognizing the biology, the nature that we have available to us to activate.
Mm. Dr. Jeffrey Karp, how can people connect with you?
Sure. Yeah. So you can go to my website, which is my name. So just Jeff Karp, Karp with a K, .com. And those pop up there actually for a newsletter that I recently started, which includes all sorts of rituals and practices, things that I'm practicing on a daily basis, and as well as, people who have shared their rituals, and I've been practicing them, and, sort of discussing those experiences. So yeah, you can go to my website, and there's ways you can reach out to me there as well if you have questions or ideas.
Okay, jeffkarp.com. And you wrote a book recently. Do you want to share what that book is?
Sure. The book is called Lit Life Ignition Tools, and it's published by HarperCollins, and it's all about intercepting routine patterns in our lives to actively think and decide versus just jumping in with habitual responses. So it's really a book of on ramps towards very accessible, simple ways to engage intention in our lives. And I interviewed 40 people, including like Nobel Prize winners and Olympic medalists and social justice leaders, indigenous leaders, and just asked them, what do they do to be more intentional in their lives? And I tell those stories and share those practices.
Oh, excellent. You're wonderful. Thank you for this beautiful conversation. It's been a blessing and a joy, and I hope that you have an incredible day and that your work continues to forward and progress how people think about living intentionally.
Thank you so much, Charlene, for inviting me here, and for everybody for tuning in. And yeah, and yeah, I'm really excited to hear all the other you know, everything else that everybody's saying here. I mean, it's so wonderful. I was listening to the previous session a bit, and yeah, thank you again for putting this together. It's so amazing.
It's my pleasure. I made this conversation find the ears that need to hear it and change the way people think. That was the other thing is just see something differently. Be willing to think differently, which is so important in today's political division. Is just we'll say, well, maybe I can see this differently. So thank you for leaving with that with us and for the introduction to our next incredible guest. I appreciate you for connecting us.
Excellent. All right. Hey, Jeline.